contribution as an enabler for the Sustainable Development Goals. And not only to monitor the progress, but also to inclusively engage stakeholders at all levels to advance evidence-based policies and programs and to reach the most vulnerable people. The COVID pandemic has shown that data can improve the provision of timely humanitarian aid. It saves lives and increase overall well-being. Yet there are still multiple risks, including risks to privacy as well as other human rights that are linked to the unsafe and unjustified collection and use of data. Such risks, if not properly mitigated in advance, may cause harm to individuals or groups of individuals. So that's why, as Angela said, the theme for the data protection, the data privacy day is your privacy matters. So the privacy of individuals behind the data matters. Now, let's go to our first panelist. So our first panelist is a digital privacy leader and key advocate within government, diplomatic, and private industries. She has over 10 years of global leadership in data and AI governance. She has led transformative global policy development at the United Nations as one of the key experts in the emerging data and AI regulatory and policy issues. During her time at the UN, she successfully drafted the first UN enterprise framework of policies regarding data privacy and digital ethics, formally adopted by the UN. And she also co-led the development and the implementation of data protection pillar of first UN data strategy. In addition to her expertise in the global data policy and law, she's also admitted to practice law in New York and has 2 LLM degrees at Pace University in comparative international law and environmental law. She works with UN Global Pulse, and she has been engaging closely with the government of Uganda on data markets, infrastructure, the fourth industrial revolution, but also on the ethical AI framework. So please welcome with me Miss Mila Romanov, who is going to tell us more about the challenges and opportunities for data sharing that she has identified while playing her role in supporting the achievement of the SDGs. But she will also tell us how can data markets facilitate privacy respectful data sharing. Mila, over to you.
Thank you very much, Martin, and thank you very much for such an extensive introduction. I want to congratulate the Data Protection Office and the government of Uganda for organizing such a wonderful week leading up to the International Data Protection Day. The first one is a celebration in Uganda with the establishment of the Data Protection Office, and it is an honor to be part of it. As Martin mentioned, I will give a brief overview of the challenges that Global Pulse has identified over the course of multiple years working in the data access and data sharing space. We've been working with multiple partners in this over the course of, I would say, over a decade, starting more with the data philanthropy as one of the initiatives that encourages sharing of data on a pro bono basis. But the role or the key idea behind data sharing, as it stands for the United Nations, is the sharing of data as a mean for public good. Data is a valuable resource, and that has been acknowledged on multiple occasions. Data can help us achieve the SDGs, coming from various sources, public and private, coming from what we say as people, from what we do, from what we say on radio or what we say on social media, to, to what we do with our credit card transactions, or when we're searching online, to when we're just simply registering for a webinar like today. We're all leaving traces behind. And as you can imagine, within the last 2 years, there has been more data generated than ever, because more and more people are interacting online due to the social distancing restrictions and working from home. Internet, like never before, started playing a crucial role in all this. But again, the digital traces that we have been leaving for the years with the creation of the internet and technology has increased significantly. So data is a treasure, but data is also a resource that can cause harm, and that has been acknowledged by the Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights and the UN Secretary General in the in the strategy on emerging technologies. And the high-level panel on digital cooperation recognized that data is a valuable resource, and as a matter of fact, is a public good by itself. However, we do need to establish proper mechanisms to utilize this resource in the right way, so it doesn't cause harm, but to the contrary, creates the benefits and helps us achieve the SDGs as well as national priorities within each country. So with Global Pulse, and Martin would probably be the best one to position to speak about the actual benefits, but data can be used, mobile data can be used to understand how people are moving, which can lead to decision-making about delivery of humanitarian aid during the humanitarian crises. Social media data can be used to not only analyze our behavior and advertise services to us, but can actually be used to understand what types of policy needs to be implemented by the government to support our education system or healthcare. Data is a valuable resource, but it needs to be treated with caution. And at Global Pulse, we have been working with various partners to develop frameworks that would enable access to data in a privacy-respectful and ethical way. And why do I say privacy and ethical? Is because when we talk about data access, it's not just about data privacy, and it's not just about data protection. In the old, I would say not old world, today's world as well, privacy as we see it is about an individual. It's about an identifiable person being able to access their data or producing their data that is being shared with various third parties. Is the data about an identifiable individual? What we've been talking about at Global Pulse, together with many UN agencies and public sector and private sector organizations, is that use of data is not always about individual traces. Use of data, when aggregated, can produce valuable insights, even when it's not disaggregated to an individual level. And the aggregated data, including coming from the call detail records. And thankfully, we have a representative from a mobile operator today, as well as the GSM Association, to talk about this. In fact, mobility data can help us understand and develop population mapping, population mobility, produce epidemiological modeling, economic modeling. And in fact, during the COVID-19 response, data aggregated to certain extents was actually used to develop these types of benefits and assist the health services in battling with COVID-19 as part of their response. So it's not always about the risk to individuals, but I would stress it's also about the risk to groups. So when we're talking about the use of data, what we've been saying is that we should not only consider the risks to an individual person, but we should also take into account the group harms, particularly identifiable groups of people. And when the data is aggregated to a certain level, that is true, it may not be disaggregated to identify a person, but it can be aggregated to such an extent as to identify a certain village or a certain social layer or certain religious group. And especially when being used by the United Nations in their operations or by public sector authorities, that should be taken into account. And that part of a concept went into our work together with private sector through our UN Global Pulse advisory group on data governance and ethics of AI. As well as our work that we've done with the various governments, including the European Union, as part of their data strategy on business to government data sharing. That as we talk about data access and ensuring privacy protection, we need to take into account both the risks of data use as well as the risks of its non-use. And that should relate to both the groups of individuals that could be identified, as well as individuals themselves. As part of my work, as part of our work on data access, as we recognize data is a valuable resource, we still see that there are multiple challenges when it comes down to access to data. Well, specifically, access itself is a challenge, but access to quality data is one of the key challenges that we've identified globally. The technical challenges, or I would say mechanisms, such as data sharing protocols or common protocols on data sharing, is another challenge that we've identified in order to enable access to privacy protective access to data. Legal challenges, such as development of legal standards as well as contracts, and that comes it is very relevant, especially in the global landscape of data transfers and various types of legislation and approaches to data protection that is currently being enacted in various parts of the world. And as we were working with the government of Uganda for years, including leading up to the adoption of the Data Protection Act, we've been talking about the influence of various data protection legislations around the world, including GDPR, with its economic impacts that relate to data traveling across borders. Social challenges, such as understanding of people's understanding of the risks that are associated with data use and their use and their sharing of data with other parties. And then, of course, one of the key challenges in data access is also business and commercial challenges. And those relate to business incentives and businesses actually willing to invest into data sharing and allowing government, allowing civil society and academia to reuse their data that was originally purposed for only internal business transactions. So these are the overall global challenges that we were able to identify as part of our research and work with various NGOs as well as governments. But I would say in Uganda specifically, we've been working together with the task force also for a few years now to not only develop the fourth industrial revolution strategy that actually stresses the need to develop a viable data strategy and a data market for sustainable data access, but also the development of the ethical AI framework, acknowledging that the use of AI is also crucial in the digital economy. And data plays a crucial part in both, whether it is used as part of innovation and support of national priorities, or whether it is used to simply train artificial intelligence and algorithms. So data is everywhere. And as we were working with the task force on the fourth industrial revolution, we've identified that we need to talk about the incentives to enhance the vibrancy of a data market throughout Uganda. And within the last year, we've been engaging with the expert task force to support their work on the establishment of a data market, which is a platform or a space, as it speaks for itself, for data exchanges, whether for free, whether for certain commercial benefit, or whether for data. Because in fact, a data market could exist to allow various parties to exchange data with each other, whether it's government with a government or government with the private sector. And it could be done on a bilateral basis or with multiple parties at the same time. What we are concentrating on right now with the expert task force is actually developing a governance framework for a privacy protective data exchange platform to enable access to data in Uganda. And together with private sector, academia, civil society, and government bodies, within the next couple of months, we will be looking into the privacy solutions at the technical level, as well as the policy level, to help exchanges of data, which could be used for various purposes, but also to support the national priorities. And we believe this cannot be done without a multi-stakeholder engagement at the national level and across the country. And for these reasons, together today, we're very thankful for having your presence and having your thoughts and recommendations on how further we could engage with you to develop such a sustainable privacy protective framework to work together with private sector, enable sharing of data with government, civil society, and academia to benefit the national priorities of Uganda. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mila, for that interesting presentation and discussion of issues, around around the different uses of data, but also why it is important to share data. And you've ended, talking about the data markets infrastructure work that we're trying to do, that UN Global Pulse is trying to do with the government of Uganda. Now, allow me to go to our next panelist, Caroline Mugo. Is a senior policy manager, Sub-Saharan Africa at the GSMA, that is the Global Systems for Mobile Association. She recently received a head of state commendation from the President of the Republic of Kenya in recognition of her contribution in shaping ICT policy in Kenya. At the GSMA, she's responsible for developing industrial positions and driving implementation of the same through government relations and policy engagement in Sub-Saharan Africa to ensure everyone and everything is connected for a better future. She has a position, she has a passion for digital development and transformation in Africa, and therefore drives advocacy for policy and regulatory reforms that ensure everyone can participate in the digital economy. She has over 15 years of experience in telecommunications industry with a strong command in the various key issues such as digital inclusion, financial inclusion, data privacy and protection, spectrum management, and competition, among others. Caroline holds an MBA from Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology, public policy certification from London School of Economics and Political Science, and is an alumni of the Strathmore Business School Public Policy Executive Program. So, Caroline, you're welcome. Now, Caroline, you will tell us about, so we know that, that GSMA and its member telecommunication companies have been involved in a number of mobile data sharing initiatives, especially to support the response to COVID-19 in Africa. And we want you to use examples of those data sharing initiatives during COVID to illustrate the challenges and opportunities you have encountered. Caroline, over to you.
Thank you very much, Martin, for that very elaborate introduction. And just as you mentioned, my name is Caroline Bugwa. And for me, I would first want to, congratulate the organizers of this event, and more particularly the government of Rwanda for being a beacon and for being one of those markets that we point to in terms of development of data privacy instruments that guide engagement on data and data sharing as one of the things that we're discussing today. And of course, for this workshop that has been set up, that is important for us to continue sensitizing different stakeholders on the role that can be played so that we can all realize the full value of data. Just as Milan has mentioned, data is a key resource, and we need to find a way for data to work for us and to have that outcome that we'd all desire. So I had some slides. I promise I'm not going to make it very long. I am going to be very brief. So give me a minute and I will be populating my slides. Can you see my screen? Martin, please confirm that you can see my screen.
We can. Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So as I mentioned, it's important for us to start talking about this, this very important topic on mobile big data and the different initiatives that we had as a GSMA. So on this slide, I just wanted to quickly highlight that mobile big data is one of the areas that we as a GSMA focus on. And of course, we work with our members in developing various initiatives that can deliver the value, because as you may be aware, the mobile sector is one of the first sectors that embrace the SDGs and has been committed all this time to the delivery of the SDGs globally. And with this, we can be able to see on the onset of the pandemic, different markets in the world embrace mobile big data as analytical tool to support the response for COVID. And this is largely because everybody was almost caught unawares by this pandemic. And in terms of planning the resources that we had available, we had to quickly, come up with a plan that would be able to be implemented the easiest way. And of course, also using, getting the most value out of the resources that we have. So in Africa, we can see there are several countries where we saw big data being used. And in a couple of slides after this, I'll be able to explain exactly how this was done. So as I mentioned, the urgency of the COVID-19 response and the variety of products and services delivered shows the need for stakeholder preparedness and constant engagement to develop new solutions. So I speak to what the previous speaker said around engagement and having that collaborative approach at the end of the day, as this of course will shows the importance of knowledge sharing to promote best practice in implementing mobile big data analytics with learnings in one of the settings likely to facilitate or to be replicated anywhere else. So when I move on to the next slide here, I just want to give a brief overview of the particular initiative that we did in this time for COVID, this time that, we had on the onset of the pandemic. And the reason why I'd like to deliver these slides is for you to understand the potential that we have, or the opportunity that we have in collaborating and addressing some of the challenges we have in the region. And the AI for Impact, which is one of the teams under the GSMA, under Mobile for Development, is an initiative that was delivered over 10 months in 2020, and with funding from UK Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, that is FCDO. And with this funding, we were able to reach 14 low and middle income countries in Africa and South Asia. And the initiative has supported development of mobile big data products to aid decision makers in 4 primary countries. And these are namely DRC, Benin, Burkina Faso, and Rwanda. We also had a bit of a light touch supporting some other countries like Bangladesh, Gambia, India, Niger, Nigeria, Pakistan, etc. So at the end of the day, what the importance of data, largely for me, if you ask me, is to aid in decision making, because decision making is key so that you can be able to understand where to allocate your resources so that you can get the best value out of these resources, because we all know that resources are limited, and unless you have a proper plan in place, you may not be able to address the critical issues that you have in your market. So, as has been mentioned, mobile data is a rich and versatile resource, and mobile big data, that is, and data helps in the decision-making process for maximization of key resources. So for governments, for instance, anytime you have everybody in a particular economy will present certain issues to the government. And of course, governments also have their own priorities. So data helps governments in making decisions that will be able to understand where to allocate their resources. And this applies to many other organizations in the private sector, in the development world. We all need data to be able to support decisions that we make that at the end of the day helps us to achieve the results that we look. To make the best use of it, those who understand what is in the data and how it can be queried and analyzed need to work closely with those on the demand side who understand the problem that the government is trying to resolve. So you need to work together, both the analytical team needs to work together with the team that is seeking to address these particular issues. And to do this, a series of use cases were defined. And, if you look at on this particular presentation on the left, you will be able to see, and Milan, it's almost like you had a sneak peek of my presentation. You can be able to see some of the things that we were able to deliver. So in terms of economic modeling, we were able to have insights on impact of lockdowns on vulnerable communities, regions, and industries. And this would help governments to be able to adjust their decisions accordingly. And of course, also logistics and infrastructure monitoring, because at that time we needed to understand how, what kind of stress is being applied on infrastructure and how to be able to manage the same. And of course, our researchers were able to use this information for epidemiology modeling, which reveal how quickly the virus is spreading, to help identify transmission hotspots, and of course to be able to manage the issue and be ahead of the virus where was possible. And of course, population mobility is another area that we saw a key opportunity for engagement, because here we were able to monitor movement during lockdown and easing of restrictions as and when restriction easing commenced. And this information would be able to advise governments on the different movements we are seeing, so that we can be able to see how do we, even when you're imposing restrictions, how do we impose restrictions in a manner that will not disrupt the everyday lives of the citizens as much as, in a very severe case. And of course, population mapping. Insights on the characteristics of a given population to understand how the population gets their livelihood, what are their patterns in terms of shopping, in terms of education for their families. So what are the insights that we can gather to be able to understand citizens in a more in-depth manner, so that you can be able to provide solutions for the key challenges. And some of the outcomes in terms of the impact that we saw some social support. This was in terms of government giving out support to vulnerable groups. We saw this in a lot of markets, in a lot of countries in the region, Kenya being one of them. And of course, also financial support. We saw a lot of governments issuing financial support to some vulnerable groups as well. And there was better planning of transportation and allocation of the medical staff. So we were able to understand which areas are more affected than others, and you can be able to allocate your medical staff resources in a better way. In terms of hospital beds, we were able to understand where do we have a shortage and how do we address it, and where do we have an excess and how can that be able to be used to alleviate where there's a lot of pressure. And of course, something like a test kit. I remember the initial times, or the very first ones, when COVID hit the world. There was a very severe shortage of test kits, which are the key things to ensure that you keep testing your population, so that you can be able to isolate those who are already infected, so that you minimize the spread. So with this, we were able to understand how best you distribute this very scarce resource for your best outcome. And of course, also advising things like lockdowns and also public advice to be able for people to be able to get more information in a structured way around, the different decisions that the governments are making. But to do this, and I want to again stress on this, is the importance of collaboration and consultation among various stakeholders, because at the end of the day, it's good to understand the different stakeholders and what what role they play and how best to be able to bring these different roles together to be able to work for our benefit. So for instance, for example, if I can give an example, population distribution and mobility data obtained from mobile big data analysis could answer questions about where to implement lockdowns or curfews, and the adherence to them could also be viewed at a population level. So these are just some of the ways that we saw mobile big data information being used at the time of the pandemic in some of these markets that I have already mentioned. So when you move on to the next slide, and here I want to present the learnings, the three main learnings that we picked up in this particular work. So ecosystem partnership underpins the AI for I initiative. Again, I come back to the issue of collaboration and engagement. So we saw that for this to work, you need to be able to collaborate with a couple of stakeholders. So of course, there were governments who are driving this entire conversation, and mobile operators, because they are the ones who currently have that data, the mobile big data information, they have them. We had development agencies and NGOs, particularly for funding of some of these projects. And of course, we saw a lot of changes in policies and regulations in these particular markets, and this is something that had to be factored in a lot of this. And of course, health partners and data experts. So as I mentioned, collaboration between public and private sector partners is key in developing use cases, because you're able to understand where to prioritize and how to be able to get some of this information. And I also want to mention that data privacy and ethics are at the core of consideration for stakeholders and should be upheld to ensure the responsible and trustworthiness of data. And I believe the previous speaker has mentioned this. And of course, sustainability is crucial to unlock the full potential of mobile big data analytics, and can be realized by creating value and incentives for all stakeholders to engage long-term commitment and ongoing innovation in the AI for I ecosystem. So by and large, again, what we are just trying to say on this slide is the importance of collaboration and understanding the sustainability of a particular project. And this can only be done by understanding who the stakeholders you need in a particular project, and the role of each stakeholder, and how you can be able to encourage these particular stakeholders for long-term commitment in a particular initiative. Now, again, just to talk about data privacy, I know, it's an important thing. So data privacy is an important enabler for this work. And we have guidelines as the GSMA that give us that, we developed them at the time of COVID-19. And the one thing that is important in terms of data privacy is to understand the issue of trust. Yeah. So for you to be able, for the data that you're using to be able to guide on these decisions, it has to be trusted. And for it to be trusted, it has to have been acquired in a lawful manner, in a transparent manner, and time-bound. If you're collecting data, particularly for a specific reason or for a specific period, it needs to adhere to that. And you need to communicate that to the data subjects and any other stakeholders that are involved. And of course, as I mentioned, assurance to ask from governments and agencies, of course, is lawful and fair, transparent, purpose limitations. So these are just some of the guidelines that we developed during, on the onset of COVID-19 pandemic that can be used when you're looking at such an initiative, so that you can be able to have that trust that is required by all the stakeholders that are involved. So of course, things like avoid discrimination and respect fundamental rights, that's at the center of the conversation, because at the end of the day, the rights of the data subjects have to be protected, and they have to feel safe. They have to feel that the information is being used for a good, and at the end of the day, it's delivering value for the entire population. Over and above the data privacy COVID-19 response guidelines, we have an overall smart data privacy law guideline that we have developed as a GSMA in collaboration with the industry. And this gives a guide around the Data Privacy Act that needs to be prepared in a particular market, so that that can be used as an anchor document and a reference document when people are actually looking to develop such initiatives. And these are just some of the key takeouts of this document. You know, it takes a local and national traditional culture, and of course, one of the other things is it has to be applied in a horizontal manner, so cuts across various sectors. It needs to promote cross-border data flow as a key thing, because some of these, for you to get the full benefit of some of these initiatives, there needs to be cross-pollination from one nation to another. So that's a thing that needs to be focused on when developing these laws. I believe these slides will be available after this. I mean, we can be able to share this, and I can, as we continue with this conversation, I can share a link to a lot of this material that I'm referring to that you can be able to access. So lastly, and this is my final slide, I just wanted to say that as a GSMA, we normally have a capacity building session that is targeted as policymakers and regulators. So of course, government employees, and you can be able to benefit, and particularly what would be relevant to this conversation is principles of mobile data or mobile privacy and big data analytics and artificial intelligence for impact. Those are two courses that I would recommend anybody who would be interested in. Of course, that falls in that category under regulator or policymakers. So this would be at the Ministry or the Data Privacy Officer, to be able to look at this, and this would give in-depth information about what I'm discussing, and would be able to get even more insights around how to provide that enabling environment for such initiatives to be able to take place. I will post the link for the online course as well, so that you can be able to look at it and take advantage of this. I think with that, I would like to end my presentation, and thank you very much for having me and for giving me the opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Caroline, for that insightful presentation. And I think what really caught my eye was the need to look for a use case around which to actually get stakeholders behind and have a data application. So the next two panelists that we have will be focused on, we shall try to discuss more on the tourism statistics. It's good that you have given us a feel of what is possible with telecoms data when it comes to the COVID response. So in our next presenter is Mr. Stephen Asimwe, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Private Sector Foundation. But before he joined Private Sector Foundation, Mr. Asimwe was the Chief Executive Officer of Uganda Tourism Board, where he took over leadership as Uganda's tourism marketing and promotions chief from February 2014 to February 2019. With his qualification and experience as a manager, marketeer, lobbyist, strategist, writer, editor, teacher, trainer, international faculty, speaker, Stephen has served as one of the most influential person to serve as the country and board's external contact and spokesperson with the local, regional, and international media and trade and travel trade. His influence has made a difference in bringing the tourism sector as the top forex earner at around 1.35 billion. That is 10% of GDP. So with that bit of introduction of Mr. Asimwe Stephen, you can guess that he's really the person that should be talking to us about tourism. And of course, in his position as the CEO of the Private Sector Foundation, actually Uganda, he brings together all the sector companies under one umbrella, and so we are privileged to have him. Mr. Steven Asimwe, the Private Sector Foundation has identified the need for data for tourism statistics, and has been seeking to answer the question, where do tourists visit, how long do they stay, and how much do they spend? And I know you're passionate about this. So how can you tell us how how can the answer to this question benefit the tourism sector in Uganda? And the other question is, can you also try to paint a picture of the tourism industry data ecosystem landscape in Uganda? Thank you.
Thank you very much, my brother Martin, for that very kind introduction. And special thanks to the organizers from the Ministry of ICT and National Guidance of Uganda, and the Personal Data Protection Office, and to all of the participants, ladies and gentlemen. A big thank you to Mila and Caroline for giving what I think is a very good foundation for this discussion. So I won't go into the details of the importance of data. I think my two colleagues have really done a fantastic job in, enumerating the need and the essence of data. And so I really won't go very far. I will talk about a subject I know very well, which is tourism. But also allow me, first of all, to say that where I am now at the PSFU, tourism is pretty much a focal player in the private sector. The Private Sector Foundation is the apex body of all the private sector players. That includes manufacturing, trade, investment, logistics, ICT, and we do a lot of data mining. We correlate with information, and it's important that as we say that you cannot manage what you can't measure. So it's important that this topic has been brought at a such time as this one. But allow me, because of time, I think I only have about 10 minutes, which I have been given by Mr. Mwajizi, to suggest that tourism is a trend. It's a trend in experiences. And the pre-COVID statistics actually showed that about 1 billion people travel almost on a daily basis. So tourism cuts across a huge constituency. It's actually the world's biggest, at least pre-COVID, the world's biggest industry, controlling about 10% of GDP across the globe. And for the case of Uganda, pre-COVID was 10% of GDP, but 1 in 11 jobs are people employed directly, indirectly, or induced by tourism. Now, because tourism is a trend, it involves a lot of movements. The travel is a huge sector. So you have people traveling for different reasons, either for leisure, for business, for meetings, for something we call MICE, meetings, incentives, conferences, and events. You have people visiting friends and family. That's a form of tourism because it involves travel. Now, it starts with the desire to travel. And this is something that can be quantified. So you can travel either as groups, families, as couples, as in now we have individual travel, which is becoming very popular. And I'll explain why statistically this is important to discuss. So when you make a decision to travel for the reasons that I've mentioned, leisure, social, economic, or even political travel, Then the next thing that comes is how do you travel? So we have a whole array of transports, which is airlines, buses, trains. You can go by sea, by water. You can drive. You can go by bike, or you can actually choose to walk foot to a particular destination. When that decision is made, it involves money. It means you have to spend money to travel from one destination to another. So there's a whole industry around the travel industry, either by air, by land, by sea, and it's a huge concept. It speaks into distance, it speaks into time, but it also speaks into what is known as experiential activities. When that decision is made, banks, they are facilitating agencies. So you have banks, you have insurance companies, you have companies that do ticketing, travel agencies, tour guides, etc. But also you have an entire industry that has been created. So when you travel, you have to stay somewhere. So here you're talking about hotels, you're talking about lodges, you're talking about guest houses, you're talking about apartments, furnished or not. In the last couple of years, we've seen the emergence of Airbnbs. We're looking at Uber, we're looking at cabs. It's a whole industry. So then when that happens, there's so much supporting industry around you. So there's a food industry, people have to eat, you have to spend nights, that's accommodation. And accommodation can be anything from a 5-star hotel to a tent or a little igloo somewhere in the north, in the North Pole. So then there's recreation, there's an amusement, there's entertainment. If you're driving, you have to get gas. So it's a huge industry, and all of that can be quantified and qualified. Then there is an element of the people who mind your travel industry. So the people who cook food, the chefs, the waiters, the people who drive taxis. There's the taxman, there are the banks, there's insurance companies, there are suppliers of logistics. There is a huge industry. And then around all of that is a whole industry around food, the confectionery industry, the bakeries, the farmers who supply. So it's quite a huge industry involved. So in short, I'm talking about an industry worth, it's said that $1.6 trillion changes hands on a daily basis in the travel industry. So tourism is experiential, so it can be managed, it can be measured. 2, tourism is a trade, so money changes hands. It's an export in terms of economics, but also because it involves people, resources, time, opportunities, there is a whole concept of managing data around all of that. And that speaks into, from a planning perspective, and where I sat at the Uganda Tourism Board, we measured things to do with contribution to GDP. So we were able to measure how many tourists are flying into the country, how much they pay in visa fees, where do they stay, how many hotels do we have. We registered our tour operators who were able then to give a synthesis of how many people they were engaging, what places they were visiting. We have 10 national parks, 12 game reserves in Uganda. We have geographical sites, we have heritage sites, we have museums, we have conservation areas. And every entry into this place spoke to us a certain data concept. So we're then able to map out how many people came from certain countries, how many were foreigners, how many were East Africans, how many were domestics. And each of these categories of people paid a certain amount of money, which was different. So we were able to capture how much money came into the coffers of the country. So once we got that data, we were then able to correlate how much was domestic and how much was foreign, and then map out which countries, which we call the source market. Then we looked at things like seasonality. We know that right now it's the early months of the year, so there's less travel now because most of Europe and America, which constitutes the largest paid up resource zone, if you like, in winter. And these are pretty much working hours. But we also noted that, for instance, Northern Hemisphere people like to travel from about June to October, which are usually summer and autumn months. So that's the highest number of travelers. We notice that right now it's winter in the northern hemisphere, but it's summer in the southern hemisphere. So you have a lot of people flying from north to southern hemisphere countries, Australia, Southern Africa, because now it is summer, it is warmer. But then there is also the category of people who are older, the pensioners, the people who have retired, like to travel in the warmer months. So they move away from the cold, temperate countries during winter, moving down south or vice versa, depending on which time zones. We also have things to do with accommodation. I talked about that. Seasonality is one of them. Source markets, are they northern hemisphere? We've seen that in the last 20 years, the number of people from Eastern Asia have quadrupled, if you like, because they're more affluent Chinese, Koreans, Japanese, Thailand, Vietnamese now beginning to travel. Previously, it was a very closed market. They are coming in. But we also noticed that from the way they come, there are two areas we measure in tourism. We measure stay and spend, the two S's. We also measure the two V's. So stay and spend, by which country, which category, is it an age group, is it a demographic, is it a country, is it a region? But also we look at the volumes of numbers coming in and the value. Now I'll just give you a pretty much interesting statistics. Statistics have shown that the Russian market has the highest spending power per capita per person. The Russians are the largest, pay the highest amount of money, followed by the Arabs, and then the Americans, and maybe Europeans, etc. Now, but that is largely for, especially in Africa, they come for leisure, but especially wildlife. The Chinese and the Asians, on the other hand, have a higher spending capacity on shopping. So you notice that a lot of the Asian people like to spend on arts, on crafts, on memorabilia, on those are things you capture. Now, why that's important is then you position the recipient market to be able to tap into the tastes, trends of that specific inbound statistics or community. Two, we also notice that within the certain trends and tastes, we are able to measure and correlate how to treat specific segments. The more affluent Asian people favor culinary. They like to eat the food and the cuisine experience. The American and European markets, on the other hand, are more amiable to nature, conservation, and pretty much a certain need to work around communities. They are more amiable towards the people, the lifestyle of the people. They like to visit the community. And in that context, then you have a lot of philanthropists who want to give towards that. So it's important that that information is captured. So stay and spend, volumes and value are critical. We monitor customs. We like to monitor by data, preferences, likes, etc., etc. Now, why that data is important, and I wish to underscore that, is then we are able to map out in correlative terms the purpose of visits, who is visiting, what is their stay, do they stay longer or do they spend more? We noticed that, for instance, in Uganda, because of our tourism offering, which is largely conservation, wildlife, and geographical sites, the largest number of tourists were actually people coming to see birds. Uganda has the highest variety and concentration of bird species on the African continent. We have over 50% of bird species on the continent, which is about 1,080 people. But we also measured from the statistics that came in that actually people who do birding experiences spend anywhere between 17 and 21 days, as opposed to people who are going to the national parks or meetings or events who are anywhere between 3 to 7 days. Now, that helped us to map out strategically which source markets we are going to look to and which categories and segments of people we were going to visit, to target And critically, we were able then also to look at how much of that spending capacity, that demographic, those numbers were contributing directly to the tourism GDP in the context of accommodation. The best we looked at the business traveler, we looked at the leisure traveler, we looked at the adventure traveler. We also looked at the amount of investment, the quality of accommodation, and the feedback that we got, which we were then able to correlate and plan for our trade fairs and strategies. So in all of that, we were then able to segment strategically as a tourism board that we then needed to go to very, very strategic markets. So after correlating the stay and spend, the volumes and value, and the value proposition from all these people, we were then able to say, we can only go to trade fairs that give us the highest value for money in terms of projecting. And so therefore, I think this topic is it's a very good one, and it's work in progress. But what I would like to suggest is that these trends keep changing once often, because for instance, we noticed that the Japanese market, whereas it was high spenders, they were very, very intrigued and interested more in the conservation, even though in the last 20 years, they were more into the cuisine and culinary. The Chinese market, very good, but as we went along, we noticed that the more affluent Chinese spent now more on things like gambling, casinos, etc., as opposed to the middle, lower income people who are interested in culinary. So that element of being able to data map interests, pleasures, things like preferences, demographics, change of tastes, spending trends, and we're able then to influence the volumes and the value and the stay and spend proposition that we have. So I think for now, that's what I can give as in the context of that. But why that is also very important is then it helps people in the investment cycle, in the government planning process, the airlines industry, the transport, the accommodation, and also strategic planners to be able to move around those value propositions that I've made. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mr. Stephen Asinwe, for that comprehensive presentation. Lots of, new terms, the SS, the stay and spend, volumes and value, all interesting concepts, I think, around tourism statistics. And we look forward to continue to engage with you further, such that you support us in this dream of ensuring that we have kind of real-time data to support the tourism industry. So with us is also Mr. Macnon Kabarole, who is also going to tell us, where can we access this kind of statistics. So Macnon Kabarole is a senior manager for business intelligence ability in Uganda, and he's charged with leveraging data assets to maximize shared value. He oversees the areas of data governance, analytics, research, and performance management. In the last 13 years, he has been involved in management of data-related projects and activities at different levels for sectors of banking and telecoms. He holds a postgraduate diploma in project management from Uganda Management Institute, BSc Qualitative Economics from Makerere University, and several certifications in business analysis and data governance, and then also different certificates in analytics from various global institutions. So today, Macnon is going to tell us a little bit about about MTN. So Macton, as a telecommunications data collector, if I may put it that way, MTN possesses a great deal of valuable information, of valuable data to inform the tourism sector in Uganda. However, to unlock its value, consent and data privacy must be addressed. I remember you actually hinted on this in one of the workshops. So I would like to ask, what kind of data does MTN collect, and what measures have you put in place to protect or safeguard this data? Then after that, you'll tell us how can the telecommunication sector in Uganda help us to understand where tourists visit and how long they stay and how much they spend. Can we be able to generate that from your data? And then the other thing would be what is necessary to unlock the data use for this data for public. Macklin, you're welcome.
Okay, thanks, Martin, and fellow panelists and those who are attending for giving us the audience to participate in this conversation around data privacy and personal data protection, but of course, looking at the benefits of leveraging the information legally, of course, ethically and responsibly by the different stakeholders to harness the value that can come out of it. So you've asked me a number of questions. I hope you remind me as we go along, but
Sure.
I'll attempt to answer them as we move along. So the first question I think you asked was about what kind of data we collect as telecom.
Yes.
And of course, the issues around how we keep it and ensure customer and or personal data is protected. So first of all, as telecom, we naturally must collect data for us to provide the service. So for instance, for you to make a phone call, there has to be a logical way to know where you are because of how the technology works. So first of all, we need to know where you are, your location. Then as part of regulation, we are required to collect your identity information in what we call the KYC, or know your customer. So we'll know your name, your gender, your age, your probably the basic identity information. So that will be collected at the point of onboarding a customer as part of our regulatory responsibilities to of course, and the security issues that could come with the abuse of a SIM card. So this is really around the regulation. So we collect that information, but also primarily because we have to offer you a service. So we have to collect some information additional that's private, but also personal in a way. So first, the primary really importance of having this data is to give you the service. Then, of course, we must provide you quality service. So for us to give you quality service, we need to collect some information about you, how you prefer to spend your money, where you're most likely going to spend it, because we have to optimize our network to be able to meet your demands. So in many ways, this data is critical even for us to provide the service to our customers. So I want to underscore the significance of mobile big data, as our fellow panelists have already mentioned, but it is necessity for us to collect that data because we must provide quality service. So basically that's the question around what we collect. So for us to offer our services, we need to have that data, and also to meet our regulatory obligations, we have to collect personal data from our customers. So, but we have gone ahead to derive value, extra value from this personal data, responsibly, of course, to give, for instance, our customers personalized offering. So if, for instance, you are an MTN customer, I'm sure many of you are, because we wouldn't be MTN if you weren't, you have personalized offers that are the function of how you spend and how you use the services. So that's out of, leveraging the mobile big data to offer you that kind of, personalized offering. Of course, it goes also to extend to other things such as customer care. We are able to know where you are, which language you prefer to be served in, and most likely how we can communicate to you and deliver to you our services. So basically, for the most part, really, we collect this data for us to offer the service to the customer in good quality and also be able to improve our services as we go along. But as many other people have spoken about it before, telecom data can be harnessed also for social good in terms of communities in which you operate. So, for instance, the recent initiatives where government was giving, the COVID initiative, support, the money that was given to customers was delivered over telecom platforms, which is critical because you must identify the person who you're giving the money before you give them, because you have to match it with what the customer has given. So that's critical as a use case. But globally as well, telecom data has been leveraged to in public health. For instance, contact tracing for COVID-19 cases, quarantine, enforcement in some countries, because you can know the relative position of the customer, you're able to know if they have breached quarantine or lockdown guidelines. So in advanced economies and where really the partnership between government and private sector is in advanced stages, they've leveraged this for those use cases, as I have mentioned before, and our other panelists have mentioned. Then specific to, of course, the others that you've talked about, of course, public transport, planning and all that can also be leveraged using telecom data aggregated to reveal patterns of, customer movement, population, and etc. As Carol has already presented really in elaborate detail. So you also asked me about how we are actually securing this data and ensuring privacy of our customers. So first of all, MTN is a legal entity that's required by law to protect customer data. As of, I think, 31st December, we were registered with the Personal Data Protection Office as required by the DPPA 2019, the law that governs the data privacy and protection in Uganda. So by law, we have to comply. We are required by law to do it. But that's not really the motivation for us. It's also responsible of any corporate entity to ensure that customer data is protected. So even without the law, we were already practicing the global standards of, customer protection, especially around data, personal data and privacy. We have, of course, infrastructure in place in terms of physical access to the data. We've state-of-the-art data centers just to secure the physical access. Then, of course, in terms of the protection from unauthorized access from external, parties, we've done a lot of, state-of-the-art encryption of this data asset to
Hello.
Okay, sorry, I dropped off a bit, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah, so basically that's around the question of how we are securing the data. You've also asked me about the tourism sector and how we can support it, and as elaborated in detail by Mr. Stephen Asimwe. So I believe, first of all, I would like to commend Stephen for giving a very insightful piece on what we can do in the private sector, but to support the tourism agenda. But just to look at specifically telecoms and what we can do with the mobile big data. So if you look at, for instance, inbound roamers who come to visit Uganda, people who come with their, SIM cards from their countries, yeah, they come here and they roam. These people can provide valuable insight in terms of their mobility data, how the places they have visited, the amount of time they've spent there. And we can be able to look at this aggregated data and come up, with very revealing insights on where, different, visitors profiled by their countries of origin and different other aspects, to come up with, an understanding of, first of all, where the most places they're likely to visit. Then we can be able to, infer a lot of insight of what other visitors from those potential countries can actually, do while in country. This can, of course, inform your infrastructure, how you can prepare it. If, for instance, we know that certain visits are going to be, guaranteed from a certain country at a certain, during a certain period of time within the year. So then you want to inform the sector players so that they can make preparation of how they present the content to these visitors. How do they plan on their occupancy? And information like that can be valuable to ensure that the sector can thrive. So there is a lot that can be done in terms of, looking at the data responsibly, aggregating it and revealing emerging trends regarding tourism, and how even this is really just a use case of the foreigners, but there's also local tourism. Looking at, aggregate mobility data from, our customers in relation to these tourism sites, we are able to map out patterns and reveal, emerging trends in terms of places that are becoming more popular from, local tourism, so that, sector players can make informed decisions about infrastructure preparation in terms of, the ecosystem preparing for these emerging trends. So it is true that a lot can be done really using mobile big data. And we've already anyway worked with the different sector players to start.
I think we're again experiencing some problem. Magnon, can you hear us? Can anyone hear me, or it is my internet here?
Can hear you, Martin.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think it should be an issue with Magnon. Maybe as we wait for Magnon to. Yes, in the interest of time, maybe we can have a quick. We can have maybe like 1 minute can give 1 minute to Thonesta and Aritha from Smart Africa, just to tell us what Smart Africa is doing around the area of data. data privacy and protection. Aretha?
Hi, Martin. You've given me a very difficult task
Yeah, I
of
know.
sharing all that I have in 1 minute. But I just want to acknowledge the panelists that came before me for their very insightful and interesting contributions. Thank you to the NPDPO and UN Global Pass for inviting Smart Africa to participate in this important webinar. I just want to say that the Director General of Smart Africa, Mr. Lasina Kone, sends his regards and best wishes, and of course reiterates his support for your work that you're doing around data governance. So over the past few years, there's been quite some significant movements around data protection and privacy in Africa. So, so far we have 32 out of the 54 African countries that have enacted their data protection laws. We also have 24 African countries that have so far established data protection authorities. And for us as Smart Africa, our vision is to create a single digital market in Africa by 2030. And one of the key elements towards the realization of this vision is one, the harmonization of regulations, but of course, also important, equally important, is the implementation of practical solutions around this area. So I'm going to share with you what Smart Africa has been doing around data protection and privacy, and I'll try to do this as quickly as possible. So our work around data governance is premised on or guided by three main principles. So the first one is the protection of rights and freedoms of African citizens. The second one is the protection of businesses and organizations, making sure that there's a conducive environment for them to innovate and thrive. And then the third one is to make sure that we protect African state sovereignty and interests, so ensuring that value creation benefits African economies. I know Mila referred to the importance of aggregated data. So we believe that value creation is maximized when data is allowed to circulate, but in a trustworthy manner. So we've just completed work on developing a harmonization guidelines for Smart Africa member states that we did through a multi-stakeholder working group and also consultative workshops. We looked at a landscape analysis of existing data protection laws. We also did a SWOT analysis of about 8 regional and international frameworks, which included the Malabo Convention, the SADC Model on Data Protection, the ECOWAS Supplementary Act, as well as the EAC legal framework. And then we noticed that all these frameworks have their own strengths and weaknesses, but not necessarily in the same areas. So for African frameworks that we looked at, one of the weaknesses was that some of them are now outdated, or the issue of having an oversized or limited scope, and then not entirely addressing enforcement capacities of data protection authorities. We also looked at what the harmonization challenges are, and came up with harmonization and collaboration mechanisms. So main areas that came out that I'll just highlight here are around the issue of the independence of data protection authorities, also the independence of the people that work within the DPAs. So here we'll be talking about the building of capacities of the staff in the data protection authorities, and also the role of citizens in driving the importance of data protection authorities where governments may be lagging. And then of course, the issue of clear mandate and power of the data protection authorities, also encouraging collaboration between the data protection authorities across Africa with elements of peer learning there. And then in line with what I'm supposed to be talking about here, about regional efforts around data protection and data sharing, the other main issue is the issue of cross-border data flows. So you know where the level of restriction of cross-border data flows also determines or impacts trade and innovation in some way. But we were looking at how this can be done in a lawful way, and also just asking questions around what is an adequate level of protection, and then also looking at the role of DPAs in making sure that they have this information and publish this information for access by various stakeholders. But then the issue of capacity and resource constraints also comes in. We also noticed that in these frameworks, there are no specific IP or trade secret provisions. I mentioned the issue of supporting businesses to thrive. And then also the issue of non-personal data is not included because the focus was around personal data. But the Smart Africa Data Protection Working Group suggested that we should find at least a good balance between innovation and intellectual property rights, and then defining what the public interest is. From this analysis, we also analyzed the commonalities and divergences, and we are looking for what could be like the first step or a low-hanging fruit, where cooperation on shared principles or mutual recognition of the commonalities can be a starting point in terms of harmonization and enabling cross-border data flows. You know, the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement is very much premised on how we enable cross-border data flows. So we also came up with recommendations on harmonization mechanisms. So I've already mentioned, but the first one will be identification of shared interests, and then recognition and pursuit of shared principles. The third one is around mutual recognition of the commonalities around the data protection legislation. At Smart Africa, we have a project that we are working on called the Smart Africa Trust Alliance. So this one is a platform that was created to facilitate the recognition of digital IDs between a range of actors through federated certification mechanisms. So I mentioned the issue of trust is very, very critical. So Benin, Rwanda, Tunisia, and other Smart African member states are involved in this work. So the focus is mainly on enabling interoperability of the various public and private ID schemes across the continent. I also mentioned the issue of peer learning, and we've been running the Africa Data Leadership Initiative, which is a peer learning and engagement network where we had various data stakeholders coming together and learning on various issues. So this is in a nutshell. I hope I've managed to keep time. But I just want to mention that Smart Africa is continuing the work on data governance. We're going to be developing a data governance blueprint, and we're also going to be supporting member states to develop their own data strategies. So I'm very much looking forward to continuous engagement with the government of Uganda, UN Global Pulse, and others towards good governance, data governance across Africa. So thank you, Martin.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I know the time is so brief, and we have also overshot. But all these have been, interesting discussions, and it's good to know that there is a lot being done at Smart Africa, and you're open to collaboration and working together. So, in the interest of time, I'll just. I want to call upon Stella to give quick closing remarks, and then we end our webinar today. Stella.
I want to thank you very much for this opportunity, for the panelists who have spoken so passionately about their areas of expertise. I want to thank the participants who have stayed with us. It's not very easy to maintain an audience in the afternoon towards the end of the day, but they've stayed here and we thank them for that. Of course, in this webinar, we've heard a lot about how personal data may be used to inform certain decisions, to understand certain patterns, but what we need to emphasize is that this data must be collected ethically, and data privacy mechanisms must be provided. Of course, we've not had enough time to delve deeply into that, but the Privacy Week still continues. Please continue to engage us. Please engage Pulse Lab so that we understand more how this data is collected and utilized ethically. On Friday, we'll also have a panel where we'll have experts from Pulse Lab discussing more about this topic. Please join us. For those who have registered for this webinar, you use the same link to be able to access that webinar or that e-conference. I want to thank Pulse Lab. You've supported us for a very long time. as Martin indicated, from the time we were drafting the bill, we've attended Smart Africa trainings under the African Network for Data Protection Commissions. Some of them were also supported by GSMA. So you're valued partners in this journey, and we look forward to more collaboration. Thank you very much. Over to you, Martin.
Yeah, thank you, Stella. And in the interest of time, I think we shall end our webinar now. Thanks a lot to the panelists who prepared and reserved time for this, and to all the participants who have attended. Let's continue the discussion on how we can generate value from data while preserving privacy. Your privacy matters. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Have a wonderful day.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.